Right now, in a country of more than 330 million people, less than 2 out of every 100 retirement portfolios have crossed a certain number, a number that financial media throws around like it is the finish line, a number retirement calculators love to show you the moment you type in your age, $2 million. And if you have ever looked at that number and felt a knot in your stomach, wondering if you are behind, wondering if everyone else has already figured this out except you, I need you to keep watching because what I am about to show you, using real Federal Reserve data, is going to change how you think about that number completely. Here is the twist almost nobody talks about. Even the small group of people who actually reach $2 million are not necessarily safe. Some of them are walking directly into a trap that could quietly cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes they never saw coming. This is not some fringe statistic buried in an academic paper nobody reads. This comes directly from the same government data that economists and policymakers use to understand how this country actually saves for retirement. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So stay with me for the next few minutes because by the end of this video, you will know exactly where you really stand, not where the internet says you stand. And you will know the one thing almost nobody does to protect whatever they have already built. Before we get into the data, if you're serious about understanding how real American households build and actually protect their wealth, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Because every week on this channel, I break down exactly what the wealthy already know and what the rest of us were never taught in school. My name is David Marshall. And for years now I have been digging through Federal Reserve reports, IRS tax code, and something called the Survey of Consumer Finances to answer one simple question. What does financial security in retirement actually look like in real numbers, not fantasy numbers, not the numbers people brag about on the internet? What I found surprised even me, and I think it is going to surprise you too. Turn on any retirement show, scroll through any personal finance blog, plug your numbers into almost any online retirement calculator, and you will see the same message repeated over and over again. You need $2 million to retire comfortably. It has become the unofficial finish line, the number everyone quietly measures themselves against. Feel behind in life, that number is probably part of the reason why. Feel like everyone else already has it figured out except you. That number is probably part of the reason for that too. Part of why this number feels so official is that it grew out of older retirement math. Things like the 4% withdrawal rule combined with rising costs of living, and it got repeated so many times across so many platforms that it just quietly became accepted as fact. Nobody stopped to check it against real household data. Type your age and a rough savings goal into 3 different popular retirement calculators, and there is a good chance at least 2 of them will spit out a number somewhere close to $2 million, regardless of your actual expenses, your actual location, or your actual lifestyle. It is treated less like a calculation and more like a script everyone reads from, so I did. And when I finally sat down with the real numbers, the ones the Federal Reserve collects every 3 years through the Survey of Consumer Finances, the picture I found was almost the opposite of what the popular narrative sells you. Before I show you those real numbers, I need you to understand one distinction that most retirement content completely ignores, because this single idea is going to change how you read every number for the rest of this video. There is a massive difference between your total net worth and your liquid retirement assets. Total net worth includes everything you own, your home, your car, any business you run, any land, any collectibles, anything that has a resale value on paper. Liquid retirement assets are different. That is the money sitting in things like 401k accounts, IRAs, pensions, and investment accounts. Money you can actually access, spend, and use to pay your electric bill in April. Let me show you exactly why this distinction matters with a story. Meet Gerald Prout. Gerald is 66 years old, and after 35 years working as a plant supervisor in the Midwest, he finally paid off his house. That home is now worth $1.2 million, which sounds incredible, and honestly, it is an incredible achievement for anyone. On top of that, Gerald has $800,000 sitting across his 401k and a small pension buyout he rolled into an IRA. Added up, and Gerald is on paper a $2 million man. If you ask Gerald how he is doing financially, he would probably tell you he is set for life. And by net worth, technically, he is right. But here is the problem: Gerald cannot spend his house. Not unless he sells it, downsizes, moves away from the community he has lived in for 3 decades, or takes out a reverse mortgage and starts paying interest on the very asset he spent his whole working life paying off. When Gerald actually sat down and ran the numbers with a planner, using a conservative 4% withdrawal rate on his $800,000, his real usable retirement income came out to around $32,000 a year before taxes. Not $2 million worth of freedom. $32,000 a year is the number that determines his monthly reality, not the appraisal on his home. When Gerald first heard that number spoken out loud in a meeting with his advisor, his face changed. $32,000 sounded nothing like the retirement he had pictured for 3.5 decades while he clocked in every single morning. He had done everything he was told to do. He paid off debt, he never missed a mortgage payment, and yet here he was, technically a $2 million man, staring at a number that barely covered his basic expenses. This is what I call the paper wealth illusion, and it is one of the most dangerous misunderstandings in American retirement planning. Because when someone tells you they are a millionaire or that they have hit $2 million, you have no idea what that actually means for their day-to-day life unless you know how much of it is liquid. So how many Americans are actually sitting where Gerald's liquid number puts him, or better? This is where the Federal Reserve data starts to get uncomfortable, so pay close attention. According to the most recent survey of consumer finances, only 1.8%, less than 2 out of every 100 households in the entire country, have $2 million or more in liquid retirement assets. Read that again. 1.8%. Not net worth, not home equity. Actual liquid retirement money you could pull from every month. That elite group, the one you hear about constantly in retirement content, the one used as the standard everyone should be aiming for, represents less than 2% of the country. Now let's zoom out and look at the entire wealth spectrum, because the picture only gets more revealing from here. 4.7% of all households have $1 million or more in liquid retirement assets. If you narrow that down specifically to retired individuals rather than all households combined, that number drops even further, down to around 3.2%. Push higher and it gets rarer still. Only 0.8% of households have $3 million or more sitting in liquid retirement assets. And at $5 million or more, you're looking at just 0.1% of the entire country, 1 in 1,000 people. Before we go further, I want you to actually place yourself somewhere on this spectrum, honestly, not where you wish you were, but where your real liquid accounts sit today, because the rest of this video is going to matter a lot more once you know exactly which group you are really standing in. Now here is the number I think deserves the most attention, the one almost nobody puts on camera. Somewhere between 90 and 91% of American households have less than $500,000 in liquid retirement assets. Let that sink in for a second. The public conversation around retirement in this country constantly centers around $2 million, $5 million, financial independence, numbers that sound impressive on a video thumbnail. Meanwhile, the actual lived reality for roughly 9 out of every 10 households sits under $500,000 in liquid retirement savings. I want to pause here and be clear about something, because I know numbers like this can trigger real retirement anxiety, and that is not what this video is for. This video is not here to make you feel like you are failing. If anything, this data should do the opposite. It should show you that the number you have been quietly comparing yourself to, the $2 million benchmark plastered across the internet, represents a level of wealth that almost nobody in this country has actually reached. You are not behind some invisible finish line that 90% of the country has already crossed. Statistically speaking, you are right in the middle of where most Americans actually are. There's also something worth understanding about how households move through this spectrum, something I call the retirement wealth jump. The gap between $500,000 and $1 million is where the vast majority of households get stuck for years, sometimes decades, because compound growth needs a large enough base before it starts moving quickly. But once a household crosses that $1 million liquid threshold, the jump toward $2 million often happens faster than people expect, simply because market growth on a larger balance produces bigger dollar gains even at the same percentage return. That is part of why the difference between 4.7% and 1.8% feels so dramatic. That middle stretch is genuinely the hardest part of the entire journey. This is really where demographic retirement research becomes so useful, because it shows us that the story is not really about people failing to save. It is about how long compound growth takes to become visible, and how most households simply have not been in the game long enough at a high enough contribution rate to see that curve bend upward yet. So if only 1.8% of households actually reach the real $2 million liquid number, what happens to people like Gerald, the ones who are wealthy on paper but not necessarily wealthy in cash flow? And more importantly, what happens to the small group who do reach real liquid wealth? Because reaching $2 million and maintaining $2 million in retirement are two completely different challenges. Let me introduce you to someone else. Deanne Whitcomb. Diane is 68, a retired schoolteacher who later became a district administrator, and unlike Gerald, her financial picture looks almost the opposite. Diane's home is modest, worth about $500,000 fully paid off. But over the last 20 years, Diane worked with a financial advisor to build up $1.5 million across a mix of traditional retirement accounts and Roth accounts. Add her home equity, and Diane's total net worth also lands right around $2 million, almost identical to Gerald's number on paper. But their realities could not be more different. Gerald has $800,000 in liquid assets. Diane has $1.5 million. Gerald has almost nothing in Roth accounts, which means nearly everything he eventually withdraws will be taxed as ordinary income. Diane has a meaningful Roth balance, which means a real portion of her future withdrawals come out completely tax-free. Gerald has flexibility in exactly one place, his home value, but almost none in his monthly cash flow. Diane has flexibility almost everywhere because her money is liquid, diversified, and structured with taxes in mind from the very beginning. Same net worth on paper, two completely different retirements in real life. Now here is where it gets even more interesting, because even the small group of Americans who do reach real liquid wealth, that 1.8%, are not out of the woods either. In fact, some of them are walking straight into what I call the preservation problem, and it tends to hit at exactly the moment they think they have already won the game. The first threat is something called required minimum distributions, or RMDs. Once you reach a certain age, currently 73, and moving to 75 in the coming years depending on your birth year, the IRS requires you to start withdrawing a minimum amount from your traditional pre-tax retirement accounts every single year, whether you actually need the money or not. If most of your $2 million sits in a traditional 401k or IRA like Gerald's does, you do not get to choose when that money comes out. The government forces your hand, and for someone with an $800,000 traditional balance, that first required withdrawal alone can land somewhere around $30,000, added directly on top of Social Security and any pension income, whether Gerald wants it that year or not. The second threat is ordinary income taxation. Every dollar that comes out of a traditional pre-tax account gets taxed as ordinary income, not at the lower capital gains rate many people expect. For someone with a large traditional balance, that required minimum distribution alone can push them into a higher tax bracket than they were ever in during their working years, which feels almost backwards to most retirees the first time it happens to them. The third threat, and this one genuinely surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it, is something called IRMAA, which stands for Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. If your income crosses certain thresholds because of those forced RMD withdrawals, the government charges you a surcharge directly on your Medicare premiums. So the very same withdrawal that pushes up your tax bill can also silently increase your monthly healthcare costs at the exact same time. Depending on how far your income crosses those thresholds, that Medicare surcharge can add hundreds of dollars a month for both you and a spouse, simply because a forced withdrawal pushed your paperwork into a higher bracket for that one single year. And the fourth threat is taxable Social Security. Once your combined income crosses certain limits, a portion of your Social Security benefit itself becomes taxable. So someone like Gerald, who spent decades quietly building up a traditional 401k because that is simply what his employer offered, could eventually find himself paying higher income taxes, higher Medicare surcharges, and taxes on his own Social Security benefit, all triggered by the same underlying issue. Too much of his wealth sitting in one single type of account with no tax diversification whatsoever. This is exactly what I mean when I say large retirement accounts can make retirees more visible to the tax system. The bigger that traditional pre-tax balance grows, the bigger the eventual bill becomes, and the government has multiple different ways of collecting it, sometimes all in the same year. This is not really personal finance content anymore at this point. This crosses directly into CPA-level retirement tax strategy, and for some families, into real estate preservation planning as well. So what is the actual solution here? This is where I want you to pay close attention, because this next part is genuinely the single most valuable planning window most people never use in their entire financial life. Between the day you retire and the day RMDs kick in at 73 or 75, there is often a window of several years where your taxable income is unusually low. You are no longer earning a salary, but you have not yet been forced into mandatory withdrawals. During this window, many financial planners recommend something called a Roth conversion, which simply means intentionally moving money from your traditional pre-tax accounts into a Roth account, paying the tax on that amount now, while you are likely sitting in a lower tax bracket instead of later, when RMDs could push you into a much higher one. This is exactly what Diane did in her early 60s. She worked with an advisor to convert roughly $60,000 a year from her traditional balance into a Roth account, spread out over about 8 years, carefully staying inside a lower tax bracket the entire time instead of taking one enormous tax hit all at once later in life. By the time Diane reached her official retirement age, a meaningful chunk of her money was already positioned to come out completely tax-free, with no required minimum distribution attached to it at all. Financial planners sometimes call this approach tax-efficient sequencing, and the broader strategy of deciding which accounts to pull from and in what order is often referred to as withdrawal coordination. Both of those ideas sound complicated, but the underlying concept is simple. It is about deciding on purpose which account gives up its money first, instead of letting the tax code decide for you by default. She started small, testing the strategy with her advisor in the very first year, watching exactly how it affected her tax return, and then scaling the amount up slightly each year after that as she got more comfortable with the process. It was not one dramatic decision. It was 8 quiet, deliberate decisions made 1 year at a time. Gerald never had that conversation. Nobody sat him down and explained tax-efficient sequencing or withdrawal coordination or the planning window sitting right in front of him for years. He simply worked hard, saved diligently into his 401k because that is what his employer offered, and assumed that reaching a big number was the finish line. But here is the truth I want you to walk away with today. It is not just about building the portfolio, it is about making sure you keep as much of it as possible. Building wealth and protecting wealth are 2 entirely different skill sets, and almost nobody ever teaches the second one. So let's bring this all the way back to where we started. Only 1.8% of households in this country actually have $2 million or more in real liquid retirement assets. 4.7% cross the $1 million mark, and somewhere around 90 to 91% of households are living with less than $500,000 in liquid retirement savings. If you are anywhere in that range, you are not behind. You are simply where most of the country actually is. But if you are one of the fortunate few approaching or already inside that 1.8%, the real work is not finished the moment you cross that number. As we talked about today, reaching $2 million and maintaining $2 million in retirement are 2 completely different challenges. The households who actually protect their wealth long-term are the ones who understand the difference between net worth and liquid assets, who plan for RMDs years before they arrive, who use that narrow planning window between retirement and 73 or 75 to convert wisely, and who stop treating a single account type as their entire retirement strategy. This brings me back to something I talk about often on this channel, what I call the oxygen philosophy. Net worth is like the walls of a house. It looks impressive from the outside, and it genuinely represents real effort, real years of work, real sacrifice. But liquidity is the oxygen inside those walls. You can build the biggest, most impressive-looking house in the entire neighborhood, but if there is no oxygen inside it, that house cannot sustain life. Gerald built beautiful, impressive walls. Diane built walls and made absolutely sure there was oxygen inside them too. That is the real difference between looking wealthy on paper and actually being able to breathe easily through 30 years of retirement. Before you go, I want to say clearly that personal finance is highly individual, and everything in this video is meant to inform you, not to replace an actual conversation with a qualified financial planner before you make any major retirement decisions. Your situation, your accounts, your family, your health, all of it changes what the right move actually is for you specifically, and no video, including this one, can replace that personalized advice. What I can tell you, based on everything the data shows, is that the households who ask these questions early, long before age 73 ever shows up on a calendar, are consistently the ones who keep more of what they actually built, instead of quietly handing large pieces of it back through taxes they never planned for. If this video gave you a clearer, more honest picture of where you actually stand compared to the rest of the country, hit subscribe right now, because next week I am breaking down exactly how households like Diane's structure their withdrawals year by year to legally minimize the very taxes I just walked you through. I will see you in the next one.